Okay, good morning. Ayin beis, volume 3. We're on page 1434. 1434. So where are we up to? We are learning. Rebbe Rashab is summing up now the subject matter that really began on page 1425. And that is just to sum up the general picture that we're dealing with how the neshamas come down to this world. So they engage with this world. The whole point is that they get involved. They don't remain aloof and detached from existence. As each of us knows, the neshama inside your body is dealing with the struggles of your life, very much part of it. It's not just above it, it's engaged with it. The battles of the animal soul, the divine soul, all the things we need to accomplish in this world is a neshama struggling in this material world. And that's the kavan. To make a dir b'tachtenim, the did not want to just send a light l'mayla l'mata from above down that just illuminates, but that we should be part of this world, manifest in a body, in a physical corner of the world in which we inhabit, and transform and refine it. We're coming from Shavuos, Matan Torah. What was the main message of Matan Torah? Was the marriage of heaven and earth. Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, Vayered, again, like Erdana. Hashem comes down, meaning that the divine manifests in levels that engage with existence. And the goal is to transform existence into a dira b'tachtein, to take the material objects of this world, like the 12 or 14, the Yud beis, Yud Gimel, the 13, 15 different items of silver, gold, copper, all the materials from which they build the Mishkan, and turn that into v'shachanti b'seichel. The divine should rest among us. Okay, so for that, the soul has to come down. So even though the soul is rooted, as we've been learning at length earlier, in Ishen Einai, the pupil of God's eye, which means it's higher than Torah, and higher than Malachim, and higher than Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people of the community, but nevertheless the neshama does come down below. So what we've been discussing throughout, and Ayin beis goes back and forth, is on one hand the neshamas come from a deeper place, but on the other hand they come down below, and here they have to engage and they have a struggle, and they need support. Going back to the example of the physical eye, even though the eye and the source and the etzem koyach hariyah, the very core power of vision, can see without any support or help, but when the eye goes into the vision goes into the physical eye, it cannot see without an external light, which he was calling Torah, the light of Torah, the light of Ner Mitzvah, the flame of mitzvahs, the power of the Einei Ha'eda, the leaders, including Moshe, but also the Sanhedrin, and ultimately also the Malachim, who are also called Einei, Einayim, the seven eyes, that they are involved in the processing. They're essentially the God's inspectors, God's overseers, the people, the entities that serve as God's shluchim, ambassadors and messengers to carry the divine light into existence, to process and carry it into and distribute it in existence, and also to carry it back. So we have here this whole support system. We're not alone in this world. Like when you read simply, even on a very physical level, you read the story of Yaakov Avinu, the angels that escorted him. We say every Friday night, Malach Shalom Aleichem, Malachi Asharis, Malachi Elyon, Malachi Ashalom. In other words, when we say an angel escorts us, essentially it's an angel supports us. You're not alone. You don't travel alone in this world. Now you could say, what do we need the angels? We have direct access to God himself. But remember, the point here is to transform existence. You want it within existence as well. You don't just want the connection to the divine as it is in the highest levels. You want the divine as it also mamalakal alman comes into Bria, Yetzir, and Asiya. And that's where the angels play that role. As we learned, the gut, Meyai, they are the karvayim. They are the abdomen, the digestive system, the stomach, the gut, all the different words we use to understand that. So this is a big part of what we're learning right now. To understand that, we have to understand how the neshama comes down below and needs this support. So that's the context. And now where we are on page 1434, it's coming to like the, you can say that, I won't say totally the conclusion, but a conclusion of a certain section. So just to sum up what we learned, now that the Vedas Adam, it's our work, not the angels, not anyone else. We are the initiators. We're the triggers. We are the ones that generate divine energy through our Avedim. And that Greidim Aliyah Lamaila Adresh Kol Dargin. We cause an Aliyah above all the way to the highest levels. I'm reading on the top of page 1434. And we're Mamshich the Eir from the highest levels downward. But this is happening through Malchus. In other words, which explains our relationship with it. Because if it was just going straight up, then we would be essentially obliterated in the process because the higher levels are not commensurate to us. So it's Malchus, the halos mashal mata ele rakat b'chinas Malchus, and Malchus on the other hand is Alakus mamish, but it's Alakus as is the mucker of Biyah. And he gave the example from the Karbonis, that when we bring the offerings, the Nefesh HaBehema is misal through the Kohen, the priest elevates Nefesh HaBehema to Pnei Shesh Merkava, which is in Biyah, in Bria, and through that the man, so it's like these are the triggers. This is the process, a step-by-step process. I say the Shtalshus is engaged, involved, because again, we want it to be within the parameters of existence. So there's a whole process going on. So it's not just like, God could have, for example, created us in a way where you just take, that you don't even need food. All you do is just like you breathe air, you're sustained from the elements of the world. But Hashem wanted that we should engage with the world. So we take food, we have to process the food, then we eat the food and we digest it, and then the digestion process breaks it down, and the nutrients enter, and the different nutrients, the more refined go to the more refined organs, the less refined go to the less refined organs. Some of it is eliminated as waste. What do you need all that for? God could have just created, be alive, and that's it. Or the same thing, why did God create? Why do we have to be born as newborns, 9 months in pregnancy, then babies, and grow until we start doing mitzvahs, at bar mitzvah or bas mitzvah? Because the dira b'tachtenim is critical. It has to be in tachtenim, in gidre ha-tachtenim, in the parameters of existence. So he's talking about this process. Okay. Then, Ozai, once the Pnesha, it goes to Mokher, Ozai, Memela Nasa Aliyas Elamis Adein Sof Mamish. And then Memela, once we've done those earlier stages of getting the ball rolling, so to speak, we've triggered the chain reaction, then Memela, what happens is Malchus then opens up the doors, and everything else, the magic that happens, that comes, like he explains now further, from the Zohar, and he brings from the Zeir Harakia Bereshis Daf Mem Beis Sof Amalav. Actually, in Biur HaZeir it says Daf Mem Hey. So I looked it up. It's actually Daf Mem Hey. In case you're interested, Mem Beis should be corrected to Mem Hey, page 45. Now what? Shviyah b'shviyah, and he quotes. We're just going to read it again because it's so fundamental. Kol hayechudim v'atfilas einim poelim rak be'echolos. So all the Yechudim and Tfilis, like he says, are not poil higher level. They poil only in the Heicholis, in the chambers. And once you make a Yichud in these chambers, which are really Biyah, the chambers in Biyah, that creates a Yichud in Atzilus. When these Heicholis get united in the 7th level, which is the Heichel of Kodesh Kodashim of Bria, in which manifests Malchus, Oz Gam Zun, then that causes that Zon Malchus should elevate Lias Man La'aval La'aba Ve'ima. So now the process is going further up from Malchus and Zah to elevate to Chachma and Bina, and then the aim, which is Bina, Mekabelas, Ma'atik Ayidei Yisei the Abba. Now Bina is reaching and receiving from Atik, and that's the Chabra Shiva Vishviyah, that the 7, which is Malchus, connects to the 7th level of Bina, which connects all the way up to Atik. The Kodesh HaKadoshim in Atzilus, which is Keser Chachma Bina in Atzilus. And that's where we stopped, I believe. No, we went a little further. Sorry, we went a few more lines. Then he said, okay, so that's that. Then he goes back to the beginning, what he began to discuss. As I said, we started now 1425. In 1425, he brought the pasuk that Haben Yakali Mefran, then it says, Hamu Me'elei Rachem, that may I, my innards, my digest, my gut aches or feels for my child, and that causes the compassion. So what do you need the gut for? So he said, now, because I'm moving in your Hamu Me'elei, which is referring to the level of Ayin beis Baka de Bria, Ubchinis Malchus that seals the Atsha Magia Halos Man Shalamata. That's why Me'ai, because Me'ai is that interface within the structure of existence that processes. Remember the word siyua, like the external light helps support that the eye should see. Same thing here, then malachim, then Me'ai, that level, what he calls now, is supports the Aveda by Yodom, who call Allah's Shekol Zehu Mumayla Mayla. And through them, meaning through these levels of Ayin beis of Bria and Malchus of Atzilus, causes the Aliyah to go higher and higher. It's Sarich Liyas Aideh Malchus Dafke. And this whole everything here has to happen through Malchus. This is the gate to Hashem. Tara la means the gate for elevation, the gate through which you need to travel to elevate to the higher levels. So here he brings back the slapshus matat and the malach. Through that is both the elevation and the drawing down the energy. And that's where we stopped. And now we'll continue. So the next section is going to address, also concluding what we learned earlier, but I want to just a small introduction. Remember, before we went to the angels and Homu Me'ai and the gut and all that, we were talking about the power of neshamas, that hamayrik be'echad, right? That when we elaborate on echad, which he explained was the elaborate process of editing, in divine unity that permeates all of existence. He said that
you broke up a little bit. Can you just repeat the last sentence, because that's an important part? What's this? The Inyan of Marif Be'echad? You're just summarizing it, but we lost you.
Are you the only one, or everyone else heard me? Just want to know what's going on.
No, I lost it too for a minute.
Yeah, me as well.
Okay. So prior to the discussion about the Malachim on page 1425, so if you go back there, you'll see that prior to that, he was talking about the two Maimar Chazal. One was Hamayrik Be'echad, and the second was Kol Ha'oina Amin Yesh Merabah B'chol Koichei, Koiden Le'Gzar Din. And he explained there at length that through our work, which is through the elaborate contemplation, Mayrich Be'echad, elaborate on divine unity, as we explained, how the divine exists within existence. Then that leads us to the divine, the Dibur, leads us to the divine thought, leads us to the divine faculties, leads us all the way to higher than Atzilus, all the way to before the Tzimtzum, even before God began to envision existence. So that a neshama, when a neshama contemplates on that below, when they say Shema, Echad, so he said that allows us, b'chol koiche, b'chol kavanose, allows us to reach these highest levels all the way in Atik, and all the way in the Helam Atzmi, and draw that down. That was basically the theme that went on for, that was the pages 14, 16, and on, where the Rebbe Rasha began to discuss that. If you want to go back to the flow even further back than that, is the Chamisha L'Ra, Chamisha L'Tov. But bottom line, it was all talking about how we draw from the highest levels into existence, and the neshama has the power to do that, b'chol moedecha, b'chol nafshecha, because the neshama is rooted in these highest levels. But then he moved back to explain, but how do we then integrate it and internalize it into existence? And here the neshama comes down below and manifests in the lower levels. And that's where we need the homumei, the gut, or the kirbayim, the angels that we talked about, malchus, about silus, as it manifests in matat, and then in bria, and all these lower levels, to integrate this experience. That's the two sides of the discussion here. Now, we're going to come away with an understanding that, and you may recall as well, that as he was going through it all, he was talking about the different kavanas, like Hamayach be'Echad is Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. But if you remember, he also mentioned Yotzer and Yishtabach. If you look back on page in our davening, before we get to Shema, we say other tefillas. The fourth Shema right here, the bottom of page, not bottom, on top of page 1429, the end of the paragraph, if you look there, says that's Melech Yochid Chelam that we say in Yishtabach. That's the level of Atik that draws from the 13 divine attributes of compassion. So you see here that in this whole discussion, there's also hints, more than hints. The Rebbe Rashab is also defining the stages of davening, which are part of the kavanah that we have in this whole process. So we're going to now go back to some of that, some of those kavanahs, because Mayach be'Echad, remember, is in Shema. Kolak Eina Amen Yeshmei Rabba is in davening in general. We say Amen Yeshmei Rabba. And now he's going to explain how these different parts of davening all correspond to these levels that we're referring to. If I recall correctly, if you remember, V'hafta es Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol meidecha follows the Shema. So in addition to all this discussion, the Rebbe Rashab is also laying out where each part of davening plays a role in all these levels. That when you go away from it, you can actually go away from Ayin beis and come to a whole kavanah, basically like a workshop on prayer that takes us from Moeda'ani through all the prayers that leads us all the way to the highest levels that we're discussing right now. And the process of how we get there and why we talk about the angels. Before we say Shema, we talk about Kodesh, 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 about the Srofim, the Chayis, the Nefani HaKodesh, why do we need to know about that? Because that's part of the process of how that they help us process and lead us into Shema and to experience Hamayach be'Echad. So that's what he's going to address right now, not at length, but if you see in the context, you see that he already referred to it earlier. So he says now like this. Now, the middle of the page, 1434. If you're following with, if you want to follow the text, it's you can find it at ayinbeis.com. The line begins Chulu Sha'ai Zeh. So now he continues. Now, and according to the above, everything we've just learned, the Chol Hashpos and Adem Malachim Shenikre Karbayim. That all the Hashpos are through the Malachim. In other words, the Hashpos don't just come down in an undiluted or unregulated manner from Atzilus. Like we learned, Atzilus is too intense. It has to go through the Tzimtzumim and has to go through Malchus and Matat, and in general, the angels. So he's referring to what he said earlier, that now, that everything comes to Malachim. If you go back to the beginning of this discussion, it says here clearly on page 1427, he says that Kol Hashpos, Be'elim Hashpos Ruchni. Gam hashpos ruchnis are all come through the malachim. It's literally repeating what we learned there. That both hashpos gashmis and hashpos ruchnis are all like just like the gut in the human body processes all food and distributes the food every part of the body. So the malachim are the ones that process and distribute all the hamshachas to every part of a part of existence. That's what we discussed there on page 1427. It actually began earlier in 1425, as I mentioned, but specifically in 1427, he made it very, very clear. That's why they're called karbayim. That's why they're called karbayim, the innards, the abdomen, the digestive system, the gut. So he says, now according to this, that all the hashpahs come through the malachim, which are called karbayim, the innards, the gut. Yuvan will understand Masha'emim Kedushas Yetzer Kedem Krishma. Why we say Kedushas Yetzer before Krishma? Because why can't we jump straight into Krishma? We already davened, we said Psukkah de Zimra, then we come to Yishtabach, Shimcha, and then we start a whole piece called Yetzer, which talks about the Malachim. And we say it before Yetzer Kedem Krishma. Why? According to what we learned above, we'll understand liyos, because the inyan krishma hu v'haftas Hashem lekecha, because Krishma's role, Krishna's message and aveda is, as we say Shema Yisrael, then we say Baruch Shem, then we say v'haftas Hashem lekecha, l'sei lebechinas av v'yira, to stimulate it and rest of God. The website only says v'hafta, so it says the S. V'hafta es Hashem l'kecha. So Chazal tell us S is kel yira. So the pasuk v'hafta es, even though there are other psukim that talk about a reverence of God, but here the S hints to yira. So all this is so Shema leads to v'hafta, which talks about the love and reverence of God, and v'hu. And how do you achieve that love and reverence? This is through these bonus, the contemplation in the pasuk Shema Yisrael. And he's going to explain Shema now is the letter Shem Ayin. So besides Shema being listen, O Israel, Shema is also the letter Shem Ayin. So you see here the Rebbe Rashab, the diag, the Pirush HaMilas of every word. So just like before he spoke about Echad, now he speaks about Shema. That it's only Bechinas Shem Balvad. Shema is telling us that what we're contemplating on is the divine that manifests within existence, which is only a Shem Balvad, like we learned earlier. It's only God's name. It's only a reflection. Shema Yisrael Shema Shem Ayin Sein Aleim Bechinas Shem Balvad Hu Sheba Bechinas Mokel Le'elamis. That only the shame itself is a mucker for the worlds. Because what's higher than that is higher than the worlds. Upira shame ayin. And what's the ayin? Okay, so shame is the shame. What does the ayin refer to? So ayin is 70. Hainu, shekol mezayin midas. So it means that 710 times 7 is 70. So it's referring to the 10 spheres of that are kolol that are encompassed of 7, that's 70, the 7 within the 10. The kol echad, the echad kol, I'm sorry, the other way around. The 7 midas of Atzilus, the kol echad, the echad kol miyut, shemisparam, ayin. Like we learned earlier, if you recall earlier, he said, we're the primary midas, and what are the primary attributes that connect to existence? It's within Atzilus itself, it's not Chabad, it's the midas, the Zayin midas. Even that needs to go through Malchus. So he's saying Shem Ayin is referring to the Shem, and Ayin is the 7 midas times 10, because each midah has all 10 in them. There's Chochmah Shebechesed, Bina Shebechesed, Das Shebechesed, all the way to Malchus Shebechesed. And the same thing with the other 6 midas, so that's 7 times 10, 70. V'kol zeh hu rak Shmoi bilvad. And all these levels is only Shmoi, it's only God's name. It's only a reflection, only a ziv, only a light and a reflection. Al erez v'shamayim, hoidu. your hoid, your beauty, your glory is on Eretz HaShemayim, heaven and earth. So hoidu is only a reflection. It's not himself. So all this is part of the contemplation that we come to. How do we come to the Ava V'Yira? Because we realize that our existence, all of it, is only a small reflection of the divine essence, which is Shmoi. And the Shmoi, the shame that manifests in the 7 midos that relate to existence. The Gam is Banan. And he also contemplates. Eich Shavaya L'Keinu Havaya Echad. So that's the first part of the tefillah. Shema Yisrael. Then what do we say after that? Havaya L'Keinu Havaya Echad. So he also contemplates how Havaya L'Keinu is Havaya Echad. What does that mean? Dahainu. That means Gam La'achesh Shenivra Elamis. Even after the worlds were created, as we learned earlier, that the worlds were created is Echad, refers to Ches and Daled. The Ches is the 7 heavens and earth. Daled are the 4 ruches, the 4 directions, east, west, north, and south. That after the worlds were created, Hakol Botlu Miyuchad B'Yechudei Yisbarach. So Hashem Elokeinu, even though when Hashem comes into Elokeinu, which relates to the divine, to the divine as it's within existence, as we learned before, Elokim is like Tzimtzum, and it's coming in a concealed way. Even there, it's Botlu Miyuchad B'Yechudei Yisbarach. Hashem Echad. It's all, even as the divine is always in the lowest levels, it's all completely nullified and united with the Yichud of Hashem, a commission is bar le'il, as we learned earlier, at length, actually, when we spoke about Hamayich Be'echad. So if you go back to page, Hamayich Be'echad, he began on page, where was it? Yeah. On page 1417. So 1417, all the way through 1424 was all discussion about the avas that are stimulated through our contemplation in Shema and Havaya Echad. There he spoke more primarily about Echad. Now he added the Shem and Ayin, the Shem Ayin of Shema. But nevertheless, we still have to explain why is Birchas Yetzer come before Shema. So before we get to that, he says, now that you've contemplated that all of existence is only a reflection, but within that reflection, it connects all the way to the highest levels of unity, because all this was designed and created by God. By Dezeh Yove, through this contemplation, Yove Levahafta, he comes to a level of Ahafta, a love. To be in a state of deep or powerful love and thirst. To what? To be absorbed, to be connected to Ein Sof Baruch Hu, where all this is rooted. Now, Uliyes Dashpos Aviyiro Adei Malachim Canal, and being that the Ashpa of Aviyiro comes through the Malachim, because the Neshama says they are below, need the Malachim to digest and process and distribute this energy, as we learned earlier about Malach Machal and Malach Gavriel. That's why Al-Kain Magdimim Birchas Yetzer L'Krishma. That's why before we say Krishma, we say Birchas Yetzer. K'dei le'eres shefa aviyira shebemalachim l'neshamas Yisrael ba'omram v'ha'ifanim. We say v'ha'ifanim v'chayas ha'kedesh. And we speak about what the angels do, the Kodesh, 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 and Misnasim, the Umas Asrafim, and so on. So he says we say that in order to awake, to stimulate the flow of Ava V'Yira that the Malachim are carrying, l'neshamas Yisrael. When we say, but when they say, when we be'emram v'haifanim, so we say v'haifanim, when they say v'haifanim, that is stimulating the malachim. And that allows, that empowers, enables us that through that should be the spilus, the excitement of love in Krishma, when the person says v'hafta. So again, if the neshamas were not manifesting in existence you could say they can get this energy straight from the source. But since we do manifest within existence, and the angels are part of the processing of the whole energy flow, so that's why before we say Shema, in order to really appreciate and internalize and integrate the Ava, we begin by saying Yotzer Precedes Shema, where we talk about the Malachim to stimulate their action, essentially is stimulating the digestive process, the gut, to do its work of making sure that the delivery of the Ava V'yira that we are accessing through V'ahavta is properly delivered and properly integrated. And with that, he concludes, as I said, this subsection of the angel's role that he began to speak about on page 1425, where he said the words that even though Yisrael are Ishen Einai, the Shalamayla, Harbim Malachim, that even though Yisrael, the Shamas Yisrael, are higher, are the pupil of the eye much higher than Malachim, which are called only the eyes of God. Nevertheless, there's a quality that the Malachim have, but the Neshamis Yisrael Mekablim have, and the Neshamis receive from them. So now we understand what the process is through the Neshamis, through the Malachim, how they support the Neshamis as they are below, which, as I said, we can use as much support as we get so that we have this support. Now, this subject is far from over. Just to give you a little sense of where we're going, you're going to see a little while from now, I'll tell you exactly where it is. He's going to actually ask this question, he's going to come back to this, and say, why do we really need, ultimately, the Malachim when the Shamas have so much power? He's going to actually ask this question quite a while from now, actually. I recall correctly, it's somewhere like... so I'm just pointing out that this is far from over, the discussion, but for now, this is what he's saying. It's later. I don't remember where exactly. Yeah, at the bottom of page 1443. We're talking about another 9 pages. He's going to come back to this. Now he's going to move over to the next part, which is back to the Neshamas being higher than Malachim. But I'll stop here for any questions.
I'm not sure I understand what it means to stimulate the flow of love and fear that the Malachim are doing for Neshamas Yisrael. I understand that the Malachim are agents, they're conduit servant, they channel down God's godly influence into this world. But how do the Malachim help us process our love and fear of God? Like, what are they essentially taking our love and fear of God and elevate? They're part of the sort of transmitting it back up. We did talk about.
You understand how the digestive? Let's just go back to the elaborate example that he gave in the beginning. The digestive, the food that you put into your mouth, which carry all the nutrients, you're putting it into your mouth, but without a digestive process, without a gut, without all that, you will not be able to turn that food into nutrients that become part of your blood, will not eliminate the waste, will not do all that distribution. That was the long explanation that he began this whole discussion with on page 1425. We discussed that, 1425 through good three pages. So I would suggest going back and just understanding the example. So that's the way God made it. Like I said, this is adira b'tachtenim. This is about integrating divine energy into existence. And just as the human body, I gave a whole discussion earlier about why didn't God just allow us to just intravenously or just organically sustain ourselves without having to a whole digestive system? Because he wants it to be internalized. So the Malachim play that role. When we say Yotzer, we are stimulating. It's like stimulating your digestion, essentially, to make sure that the flow that the angels are drawing down into our systems, are helping us, the siyua that they're providing us is done properly. So which part is not clear?
Well, the idea that we're stimulating the flow of love and fear of God, obviously, through the malachim. I mean,
No, we're stimulating the processing of the love and fear. What the digestive system processes it in order for it to be integrated. As I said, go back to the example. The food is what sustains us. It's not the angels that sustain us. The angels process the food and turn it into energy that we can digest and internalize. The same thing here. We say v'ahavta, but we want it to be internalized and integrated inside of us. That's why we proceed by talking about the malachim, because that's their role, kirbayim.
I see.
Their role is processing that.
I understand.
Ava v'yira is what we are initiating and generating. And we touch the high levels. We can, goes all the way up to levels of chesed and gvura of atzilus. But chesed and gvura of atzilus, as we learned at length, are ein sof. They need malchus. They need matat. They need all the processes to be able to internalize it into our lives.
Got it. Thank you.
Is it sort of like a transformer, an energy transformer, in the way that the malachim are?
That's not the example he uses here, but if that example helps you, fine with me.
I mean, is it analogous to that, do you think?
I don't know how transformer works exactly, to be honest, but the digestive process is the example he gives here. If you could explain to me how the transformer works, I can tell you if it's analogous.
It's a way to step down the energy somewhat, I believe.
Okay, so then fine. Then it's a fine example. There are many examples. I give an example of ambassadors, delivery men, mailmen. I mean, there's so many ways to explain. You see all of existence. That's why I said, find ways to understand it in your life. Sorry, from our flesh in our lives. Find ways that we can relate to it in our avodah. Like, why would you need, for example, to go to a mashpia and a mentor for advice? Why can't you figure it out yourself? At the end of the day, you have to do the work because they help you process it. They help you review it. They help you some objectivity. They help you. And process is a good word, actually. So whatever examples work are great. I mean, the theme here is pretty clear, talking about how to internalize all of this. The digestive system is the direct analogy he uses here. But transformers, fine. I've used words like filter, regulators. We talked about electricity. Electricity, there's all the circuit breakers that serve to, like you just said about the transformer, they serve to regulate the flow. I used the example of a faucet. If you go back to the classes, I've used probably myself 10 examples at least. Obviously, the example of a teacher regulating the flow of his teachings to his students with examples and so on. So the more examples you can find, the better that work. Because the key is to understand the necessity for these levels. The challenge here is that you have to realize that just as it works in the physical world, so does it work in the spiritual world.
Should you?
This is, by the way, the reason we daven every day all together. Why do we have to daven all together? Why not just wake up in the morning and connect to God through your neshama, and that's it, and go to work?
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Prayer is a process, and part of that process is he's explaining why we talk about the angels in prayer. It's one thing we talk about our own contemplation on what God is about and God's creation, the beauty of creation, the design. There are many parts to prayer. Here, what he's addressing here is that section on why we talk about the angels. Why do we need to know about what the angels are doing in heaven? It sounds almost like not relevant to us. This piece comes to answer that question. Not only here, it's in other places in Chassidus as well. But that's what he came to explain now. Why we say before Shema, Yotzer, which talks about the Malach. Next time you daven, today or any other day, look at that section, Yotzer. You'll never look at it the same way again.
I was going to say, so we should really contemplate this as we're praying, what we're learning right now. Is that,
that's exactly, Yes, indeed. That's exactly why the Rebbe Rashab is writing it, because he wants us to use this as tools of how you pray properly. Exactly.
Thank
If we
you.
learn how to pray, each part of prayer would help us in the process of bringing the divine within our beings. I was just I was talking to some people about this latest craze and fad of psychedelics, people thinking they're experiencing God and so on. So I told them, I said, there's a traditional method that's worked for 4,000 years of how we experience the divine. And they said, what is that? I said, it's called prayer. It's called avodah. Avodah satfila, avodah in general, work. And it consists of two main things. One is effort, a lot of effort, exertion, hard work. And second, commitment. Commitment, Kabbalah soil. And that's the method. I know that's not very appealing. It's much more appealing to be able to smoke something or drink something and just have a so-called transcendent, or you want to call it psychedelic or experience. But that's not how it works. It works, you want to really do it, it has to be internalized. You have to work at it. It's not, as I said, it's not as appealing as a quick fix. So that's exactly what Torah and Aveda is. Torah, Avedic, Milos Chasadim. Torah is learning about the cognitive conditioning. Prayer, tefillah is Aveda, is emotional conditioning. And mitzvahs, good deeds, is behavioral conditioning. That is the whole Torah and mitzvahs. So what we're really learning is what Torah, tefillah, and Torah, Aveda, Milos Chasadim, the three pillars upon which the world, also our personal world, stands. And that's what makes this so powerful. So Ayin beis is giving us the whole dynamics. That's why we have to understand the mechanics of it, and then we have to understand how to contemplate on it. Now you could maybe begin getting a taste why some chassidim I've seen this, spent 6 hours under a talus, davening on Shabbos, or even in the weekdays. What were they doing there? To go through all this is a serious job.
Amazing. I have to say, I do feel a difference. Just even whatever little I can absorb.
Look, let's be honest. We go to synagogues. I don't want to call it a joke, but it is. It's a joke. Where do we go? We say lip service. They knock it off in 20 minutes, an hour, whatever the amount of prayer. Now, I hope every Jew standing there is processing something and something is happening. But I grew up in this, so I'm quite aware that it's much more lip service and mechanical Judaism than it is in-depth introspection. I mean, one of the people I was talking to is actually a Jew who became a Buddhist. And he told me Judaism was a joke. I went to Buddhism. That's where I discovered meditation, mindfulness, spiritual connections, spiritual journeys. And you want to cry because that's what Judaism was always meant to do. Where did they all get it from? But it wasn't taught that way. So then when you start hearing this, I mean, I can tell you how many people have told me when I speak about these topics, they say, that's davening? I never would have believed that. The prayer, what I know, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbos, Yom Tov, weekdays, it's nothing in common with this. Basically, they yell at you to be quiet. You say, Amen Yeshmei Rabba, Amen Baruch Shmoi, and then that's it. So I said, yeah, well, good morning. We got to wake up.
It's amazing. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yes. Shema Yisrael is the pasuk that is the makor for one of the Taryag mitzvah of Achdas Hashem, which, as I've always understood it, is an intellectual understanding, not an emotional one. Certainly, let me put it this way, at least there's a very significant intellectual component to that mitzvah. So when it says here, Shem Ayin is Shema, that it's really referring just to the amidos. So what happens to the intellectual component with that understanding?
I'm not clear. You're saying it is emotional and non-intellectual? It's intellectual and not emotional? What was...
No, the Ayin beis here, the Rebbe just said that Shema is Shem Ayin, and Ayin is the 7 midos, including the 10 different aspects of the midos. It's an emotional, Shema is an emotional contemplation
So
or
first of all,
emotional thing, whereas
okay, I hear the question. So first of all, you're probably aware that davening in general is an emotional experience. When we say learning Torah is more of a cognitive, your mind. When you daven, Ezo Aveda Shabalev Zuhi Tefillah. So we talk about the three pillars I mentioned. Torah is Chabad, and Tefillah is Chagas, is emotions. That's in general, not just Shema, the whole Tefillah. But being that we are intelligent creatures, just like in Torah, you can have an emotional reaction when you're studying a mimer like we're doing now. The same thing, the emotions during davening are also include a Chabad element. So when we talk about, let's say, learning Chassidus before you daven, or it says Chassidim Arashenim HaYeshoyim, before they started to daven, they would contemplate. That was more of a meditative contemplation with the mind, Chachma Bina Das. Tefillah is the midas, the emotions of it all, but it's informed by the contemplation. And even here, if you see, he says, Gam Yizbainen Eich Shavaya Lekenu Avaya Echad. He uses the Yizbainen. So the Yizbainenus there is through learning Chassidus, and then there's a Yizbainenus in davening that's primary role is a Yizbainenus that leads to awakening midas. So this whole Maimorim that talk about exactly what is the Yizbainenus part, what's the emotional part, but overall Tefillah is an emotional experience. It's not meant to be studied. We don't study. You can study the prayers before you start davening, and you understand what they mean and understand its intention. But davening itself is already considered to be the emotional journey that you're on. But there's an element of using our minds as well. We have to understand what we're saying as well. You say a word, you say Shema, does the mere fact that you're saying Shemayin is already the mind is in action, the mind is active, but it's the mind as it's informing the emotions. That's a general understanding of tefillah in contrast to Torah. There are length tefillah Torah and midas. You have a follow-up you want to ask?
I was just going to say that according to that understanding, it would show that learning Hasidus, or certainly learning the depth intellectually, Maimorim about davening, before davening, would seem to be a vital and critical aspect of davening.
Absolutely, it's based on it's based on the Gemara and the Shulchan Aruch. The Chassidim Rishonim HaYeshoyim, before they started davening, they first created a cognitive space for it. Yeah, that's one of the reasons the Rabbeim instituted. That's one of the reasons the Rabbeim instituted.
You're breaking up on us, Rabbi. We can't hear you.
I'm not saying
right now. Oh, okay. Sorry.
I said that's why the Rabbeim instituted before davening. Like, let's say you learn what we just learned now, and then when you go daven, we're not davening right now, we're learning it. Then you go daven, you can daven with a fuller understanding of what you're dealing with. So, it's just like learning Hilchas Tefillah. Just like you learn the laws of davening, you learn the laws of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, then comes the actual experiences. The experience will be far richer and deeper once you know and you've learned what you're going to be saying.
So can I say
this is not the first time you've heard this concept?
No, of course not. But I just in the relationship to the Shemayin. But now I guess you've given me a header, so I can start davening Shachris at 11 after the shir.
That you should ask your mashpia. The way real chassidim that daven, but only Eliezer if we see you davening at 4 in the afternoon and haven't stopped for breakfast or anything.
Got it. Thank you.
Well, we do say Shema Zman Krishma. Doesn't have to be said at length. You could say it then. But people who've davened properly, I mean, the real Oivdim would start very early and they would go late. They didn't start late.
Can I ask a question about a few days ago, class? Or do you want to stay on topic here?
Go ahead.
I don't know where it was, because when I was listening to that share, actually, I didn't have it in front of me, the papers, but I think it was saying how, according to our actions in this world, we reach up to Megia la Malchus of Atzilus, and then that can, in turn, mamshich either Chesed or Gevura, depending what kind of actions we have. And
Yeah.
I think the term, one of the terms was, and it just shocked me, was that, if I'm correct, that the Rebbe says that atzvus will bring down Gevura. Now, I was understanding that, maybe I'm wrong there, but I think the term was exactly atzvus, and I was shocked because I was thinking the Rebbe is going to say an avera, doing an avera is going to mamshich Gevuras, and doing a mitzvah is going to mamshich chesed. When he says atzvus, and correct me if I'm wrong, I couldn't find it in the pages, I was looking for it. But if he says atzvus, I know the Baal Shem Tov says atzvus is not an avera al pi halacha, but it can cause more damage than an avera deraisa, like the Rabbanim. But anyways, depression itself, that would be qualified to bring down Gevuras from HaKadosh Baruch Hu and so forth.
I would have to see. I don't remember such a concept that you're saying in that context. I don't think it said that when Rishayim close the channels through their sins, what happens is that the din and gvura of Elikus manifests in a very severe din and gvura, because it's now through tzimtzum. Whereas when people are doing good deeds, the gvura is God's power of tzimtzum, like he said. So therefore, then it's a divine power, not a negative one, a positive one. That's what I recall. That's on page 1433. Closer to the top of the page in the parentheses. So you'd have to point.
You don't remember the term atzvus, then I gotta look that up, because I thought it was atzvus specifically.
Atzvus or atzmus?
No, atzvut, depression.
So then we're talking about two different things. Yeah, of course. On page, that was very close. On page 1432 and 1433, he says, when you show a smiling face above, the smile comes back to you from chesed. When you show a sour face or a sad face or a depressed face, so unfortunately, then you draw down negative energy. Yeah, that he says explicitly. That's the Zohar in Tetzava. What's the problem with that?
Because atzvus, like depression, is unfortunately, there's a very significant amount of it.
First of all, it's talking about someone who has no choice, who has a suffering from clinical depression. He's talking about somebody who has the option. It's based on our avodah. What are you referring to right now? What are you referring to? Someone that has no control over their depression? Hello?
Let's start with somebody does have control. Is more a shchoradik, and it's
considered. Atzvus is considered a sin. Look, did you ever read Tanya? The whole Tanya about
that's
how terrible Atzvus is. I'm not sure what you're saying.
Because it's not an avera about deraisa, is it? Atzvus.
Actually, it's considered sometimes. I think the Breslover said, or others say, that Atzvus is not an avera, but what Atzvus does is worse than any avera.
Right. That's what I think the Baal Shem Tov said that, I thought. But
yeah. So what's the question? Why is Atzvus so bad? Is you asking me?
Yes, because
first of all, this is all you got to do is open a Tanya, chapter 26 and on. What is it in Ayin beis that he's saying what's worse than what it says elsewhere?
It seemed to me that it would be
anyway. Yes, atzvus is considered a terrible thing.
Terrible to cause that God rain down
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's
negativity,
what the Zohar, not only
negativity.
that, he said,
Really
that's
something.
why Atzvus and Kama Garua Inyan Atzvus. How terrible is Atzvus? Because that's what it does. Atzvus brings din from above. It's like Kamayim Apanim Lapanim. When you smile to someone, you elicit a smile. When you show them depression, you get depression in return.
Right. So it was amazing to me because you normally think that if you harm somebody, speak a lashon hara, you steal money from them, you're infidelity.
Okay,
These
so
kind
now
of
you've
things
learned that Atzvus doesn't.
so yeah. I said, even though it's not I know the Baal Shem Tov says it's a horrible thing, but I didn't realize because it is not an avera al pi halacha. Al pi halacha, I don't think. So yet it does elicit such negative.
First of all, it is an
inflow.
avera because the mitzvah is Ivdus Hashem b'simcha. So as
Ah,
soon as you're not doing simcha, you're doing atzvus. So there's an avera right there.
wow, you're right that way.
So what about the people who can't control it and don't have a choice? How do you frame that within this
Well,
context?
that goes into the category. If they really can't control it, but they could let them go together. So they should go to a doctor and get what they need to get to deal with it.
Okay.
Wow, but that's really something to think that that what's the best translation of atzvus? Depression. What would
Sadness.
sadness? Yitzhak, sadness. Okay, that's sadness.
I think
Elicits
Melancholy.
melancholy and sadness. Melancholy. So
Basically, go back to Tanya. He makes it very clear. It's essentially anything that paralyzes you and makes you feel demoralized is one of the worst possible things because you cannot fight. He gives the example of two wrestlers. When you have no energy and you're like locked in. I think it's a combination of fear, anxiety. All these words are applicable to asus.
So you would think that would elicit Rahmanis from Hashem because it's not.
Well, you know what? So that's not correct, however.
Not Rahmanis. Because hey, he's melancholy, sad. God says,
so
why are you sad?
So you asking a question on Tanya why he says Asvus is so bad then?
I'm asking it on Ayin beis.
Well, no, Ayin beis is minimal to what it says in Tanya, my friend. Look at Tanya, see what I'll show you. If you're talking about sadness that motivates you to grow, that's a healthy thing. That he calls there is merirus, not atzvus. You familiar with the difference between merirus and atzvus?
Yes, okay. I am.
Atzvus is an active behavior where a person allows themselves to fall into states of fear, anxiety, depression, melancholy. There are many probably other synonyms for this.
And merirus?
And there are eitzes in Torah, Chassidus, to deal with atzvus. There are ways to deal with it. So
this point was
and just for the record, this is the Ayin beis just quoting a Zohar in Parshat Tetzaveh on page 1432, where he brings that. And Migdash Melech says, we can't move on kama garua inyana atzvus.
Yeah.
So it's another long discussion. It's not the discussion of Ayin beis. What do you do if you're in a state? That's really all that topic. That's not really what Ayin beis is coming to address. There are Maimorim that talk at length. What do you do about dealing with atzvus? In Tanya, he talks about it actually. So this requires focusing on your soul, focusing on your positives, focusing on your connection to God, focusing on the things that help you grow. The difference between somebody who's demoralized by negative circumstances and by someone who's motivated by them. This is the common thing. Are you a victim of circumstances, or do you learn how to navigate them? All the discussions about how people deal with fear, anxiety, being paralyzed by negative thoughts. That's a whole discussion. It's not really the context of Ayin beis, but that I'd refer you to. I've probably spoken about it, maybe hundreds of classes just on this topic.
Right.
And how would you define Merirus and relative to Atzvus? You were going there, but then you stopped. Why is Merirus?
I just want to make it clear for everybody in this
Yes.
class, whoever hears it afterwards, that this has nothing to do with Ayin beis, not this section of Ayin beis. I'm happy to satisfy your curiosity, but it's really nothing to do with Ayin beis.
No,
Because
but
Ayin beis is
we're
not
here-
talking about Atzvus. Ayin beis was talking about the idea of where our Veda touches and what we reach is what we have, what effects we have on above. The conventional difference between Merirus and Atzvus, I would suggest to go to Tanya chapters 26 and on. Some people translate Atzvus as depression and Merirus as sadness. If you want to have a real more definitive, one demoralizes, one motivates.
Uh-huh. Okay.
There are people that can be, we have setbacks. We have situations that are difficult. You know, you sit, God forbid someone loses a relative, they sit shiva. That's sadness. That's fine. But that doesn't, but you don't allow it to destroy you and demoralize you to the point that you become paralyzed and don't make any moves. The goal is that the sadness should propel you to greater heights. If somebody bullies you, if somebody hurts somebody, insults them, and all it does is demoralize, that's considered terrible.
Right. I think you're getting a lot of feedback, and it's not you, but response to the Ayin beis here on the inyan of what's happening in Malchus. That's how we got there. Then Malchus is like it's a mamutza, it's an interface, it's an aperture through which our actions below, our behavior below, our attitude below is effectuates drawing energy down. What kind of energy does it draw down? So if we reflect positive energy above, then the Eibishter through Malchus draws down the positive energy. And conversely, if we reflect negative energy or atzvus, then apparently what's drawn down is gvura, is restriction.
Yeah, but so frankly, but even that concept, you've never heard before the idea of midah keneged midah? That God does measure for measure. When you give tzedakah, God gives tzedakah to you. When you pray for someone, God prays for you. I mean, the concept of our actions creating a reaction from above is a very central concept in all of Torah. I understand that it's coming up now when we learn Ayin beis. I don't have an issue with that. That's why I'm addressing it. I just want to make it clear that if you want to have a full discussion on atzvus and how to deal with it, I would recommend other Maimorim. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I hear you, but I mean, we were here before. I mean, Eliezer went there, the Rabbis started talking about. We're here now. The inyan is like this. Do you think the Eibishter is sort of above just an automatic ipso facto reaction to our depression, right? He's God. So if we are suffering here, we're sad for whatever reason. Okay, if we can control it, I get that. I'm not arguing with the Rebbe, but I think one can understand how if someone's stuck in a place where they're sad and they just can't find the motivation, even if they really tried harder, they could. Somehow he's our Father. He should understand our situation. He knows our situation or circumstances better than we ourselves know it. And so he shouldn't be just like ipso facto, like a reaction, like an automatic knee-jerk reaction. He should say, oh, okay, you're sad, you could do better. I know you could do better. You don't think you could do better. I'm going to reflect the restriction. We're a bad guy. It seems, I said before, it sounds cruel. We did talk about this.
Right? But that's why a person can't lift himself up out. So Hashem will then somehow, you're looking
be
at
even
it
harsher on him.
narrowly. So
Isaac,
with all respect, I'll rephrase the whole thing in a very different way, how I see it. If we were indeed 2-year-olds, and the 2-year-old can't do anything, so a parent, when he sees a baby crying, picks the baby up. But since God looks at us as adults and says, I blessed you with tremendous faculties and tremendous resources, and it's in my depth of my love that I'm telling you, you have the strength. I've given you everything you need to walk on your own. So yes, if you are a 1-year-old, it's one thing. But even a 1-year-old, a healthy parent, is not going to generally show compassion if the child falls. You want the child to walk. You want to show the child, I'm there for you, and I'll respond to you. But I want you to learn how to walk on your own. The whole purpose of existence is a partnership with us. So I see this on the contrary as the greatest love possible. If God would do it for us, that would be, in my opinion, cruel. That means he would then clip our wings and essentially turn us into spoiled brats. So I look at it like this: we're partners. Our actions have tremendous impact. It's not some automatic thing. We are partners with God. God says, you do your part, I'll do my part. We're constant partners. Now, if you make a mistake, you always have the concept of tshuva. We have that as well. So, frankly, this is not an Ayin beis discussion, to be honest, at all. This is a discussion about Judaism in general, why God expects things from us. Why doesn't he just treat us, and just every time something happens negative, why doesn't he just intervene? Why does he let people suffer? This is back to the Job's big questions. Why do innocent people suffer and wicked people prosper? Why was there a Holocaust? I understand the importance of this discussion. I'm just trying to contextualize. Ayin beis is not really going there right now. That's not the goal here. Ayin beis is explaining the dynamics of this relationship. It's not explaining the philosophical underpinnings of why God created such a relationship. I bring that in because I like to explain things, and I understand the interest in going there. But I also have the discipline to tell you that there are entire Maimorim and entire places where that's discussed at length. Here is not the place. That's what I'm pointing out here. Not that it isn't important, and not that it doesn't extend from this discussion. I understand it will provoke these questions. That's not, as I always said, every question is fair and legitimate. The question is, like the Gemara says, are we in that Masechta, or are we learning a different Masechta now?
Mhm.
Just a question, what are we learning now? That's the issue, not whether the questions are valid and important. I've learned quite a few little chassidus, quite a lot of chassidus, as you may imagine. I've learned these topics. When I learned this, these questions don't really come to me here. They come from other places. Nothing here in Ayin beis, in my view at least, said something that I would say is more provocative than is said in other places. It could be that for some of you, you're hearing it for the first time here, because you're learning it for the first time. But the idea that God is midah keneged midah, that he created a action-reaction, cause and effect, is the whole idea of reward and punishment in the Torah. The whole idea of, you do this, you'll be rewarded with these rewards. If you don't follow these laws, look at some of the curses in the Torah. They're quite horrendous. So I don't understand it as reward and punishment. I see it as cause and effect, something we've touched upon. And the Ayin beis is touching on that concept of cause and effect and where it's taking place in Malchus. That's all I'm really saying here. So the issues are very important issues. And as I said, some things we can touch upon here. But if you really want something exhaustive, you want me to go into it from beginning to end, I would say it's not an Ayin beis discussion. It's more of a discussion of God's relationship with us in the context, especially when we're suffering, why God doesn't show compassion to people who are in terrible pain or in general in pain.
The Rebbe Rashab has the Maimer V'Yodata Maskva that goes into that whole thing, I think.
Nisyanis, he talks about Nisyanis there. But there are other places. I have entire chapters on it: fear and anxiety, pain and suffering, good and evil. 3 chapters in Torah Meaning for Life that are dedicated completely to this. Basically, there are 2 ways God intervenes. One is he can either do it for us, or he can give us the tools to do it, to solve the issues. And in most cases, the latter that God offers us.
The pasuk that I was, not the pasuk, but
By the way, just for the record, we do pray for compassion. It's not like when someone is in pain, by all means pray, but we all know that prayer has to come with action.
The pasuk I found that my question was based on originally was on page 1433, where it says V'yesh lomer the bechinas chesed gevura dezah im tikun amalchus k'deboy lemahave nimshach ba bechinas chesed v'im chas v'sholom lehefech nimshach ba bechinas gevura kulu v'zeh shekasu v'zohar titzave v'im hihu kaima dat sivu that sivoy yavin le dina. That's the one I was trying to understand.
And go back a page earlier, and the Zohar Tetzav is elaborated upon in 10 lines.
Okay.
Go to the previous page. It's already said earlier. He refers to canal, you see?
Yes. Okay.
So he said that. Yes, correct. And that's correct. But that's essentially the Mida Keneged Mida. Why do, when you've all, right before Shavuos, we read Parsha B'Chukosei, right?
Yeah.
In B'Chukosei, we read, in B'Chukosei Tilechu, when you'll follow my laws, V'nasati Geshmeichem B'item, I will send you Geshem. That's Chesed. Then he continues and says, if you don't follow my laws, and then read on, what are you, the 48 curses that he quotes there. That's Gvura. So that's even before the Zohar. So the Zohar is not saying anything different than what it says in those verses. It's just putting it into context of Chesed and Gvura.
I know it says Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, but I don't think anywhere in the Chumash it commands happiness. It's a nice saying, and I agree with it. I believe in it. But to say it's Dafka, one of 613 mitzvahs.
When you looked in Tanya, he brings a pasuk about Atz was being very a sin. Tanya chapter 26.
26. Mm-hmm. I've been sufficiently motivated this morning to go reread 26 this morning.
But then the question I then have,
everything is not everything is also in the context of mitzvahs and averos. There are many things that it doesn't say in the Torah specifically, and yet we know it's either consistent with God's way of us living or not consistent.
I don't disagree with that.
Enough svarim in Torah Shabbat Peh that talk about the negative effects of atzvus and marish chera, and if you look in the Tanya and another place, look at the Zohar, how intense. Are you asking a question where the Zohar is getting it from? So I just gave you, I mean, I'm not sure what we're trying to cover here.
well, the line after that, I mean, it was just I think we all know Mida Keneged Mida, Behukosai, and the Torah. I was just personally reacting to the fact that Atzvus would bring down not Geneva, not Lashon Hara, that Atzvus, which seems to be a fairly prevalent thing that would seem to elicit rachmim.
Okay, so look, what should I tell you? So maybe you've been enlightened.
But I understand your answer.
So that's, look, I understand that it may disturb you, but this is what it says.
Yeah, I understand. So
what should I tell you?
What's the next line where it says, after that, it brings down Din, the Atzvus, and then it says, Bo'orein sof l'mayla matzilas hu kasher malchus hu muchenet the kabel or shizehu shehi bechinas niru da'anpin nimshach or milamayla bechinas atika ba'az kol medregas heim bechinas arachamim. That is only if we have a smiling face, correct? It's going to bring down rachamim. Is that right with that line?
I've been teaching this now for a few weeks, these pages.
Yes.
At this point, I'm not sure what you're asking me. You maybe go back to read them again.
Okay.
Read it with the classes, they're all recorded.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. You're asking me pshat, you asked me to go over everything we discussed. You have a specific question. I'm not right now. I'm getting to a point I don't understand where we're going here.
Okay.
I discussed this for literally the last few weeks. All the classes have been on this.
It was only on that one line. Okay, I've got it. I'm not going to continue. I understand. I've probably brought this out a lot. So, but I understand what you just said. Okay, it was on.
Just give me 1 second, guys. 1 second. 1 second.
By the way, Yitzhak, thank you for expressing what I wanted to ask in a very nice, clear way. We said about yeah. Thank you.
No, I get it. I knew I had the same problem you had. We had a little bit of a debate like this when it came up before. This you definitely pushed it to the more, but it's good.
I pushed it maybe a little too far, but I guess we're going to stop.
No, it's okay. I still have the same problem with it, but it says what it says.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Did that line shock you also?
Yes, big time.
Okay.
Big time.
Thank you.
We had, you may not have been in that class or listened to the recording, but we had a little debate like this at that time, and you'll hear a similar response from him. But it says what it says, and the place where I'm helped is that the Indian of, like, if someone can't help that they're depressed, they have to have, if they have a choice, if they really have a fair ability to change their mood, and they just want to be sad, want to be a sourpuss, they really could turn it around if they wanted to, but they don't want to. So then God said, okay, you want to be a sourpuss, you want to be negative, then unfortunately I'm going to be restrictive towards you. But it hinges on the idea that someone actually has a choice. And unfortunately, there are many people, many situations where people really are so sad or depressed because of the circumstances, or even biochemically, or both, that they don't really have a true choice. And I don't think that situation is described by this Indian here. And so therefore God's going to be restrictive and send Gura down with those people. That's where I go with this. I just cannot accept that someone who can't help their sadness, or maybe they could if they really had enough help, that somehow they're going to keep getting Vora until they turn it around. I have a hard time buying it. I do think it makes sense, though, what I think this is what Rabbi Jacobson was saying, is that if you have the ability to do it, if you really tried, you put your mind to it and stop being stubborn, stop being like a little baby, and you can turn it around, then God is saying, okay, if you can't turn it around, or you don't decide, make a conscious decision, you're not going to turn it around, you're gonna get Gura. But
let me interject here. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's the most, but there are probably hundreds and hundreds of letters that the Rebbe wrote to people who talk about atzvus and how different life situations have challenged them, difficult situations. And always the Rebbe quotes these Zohars, the Tanya, and other places we've been talking about. I don't think the Rebbe ever expressed compassion as what they're going through, but never gave any inch of mercy, so to speak, or just, okay, you're entitled to be depressed. It was always challenging. Now, my understanding of it is, we're not talking about, just like you cannot expect, I'll just use a harsh example, somebody that was born without arms and legs, you can't expect them to put on tefillin. Someone was born somewhat mentally incapacitated, you can't expect them to do things that are just not in their ability to do. The question is, understanding the human soul, and someone claims they're depressed, and they claim their only solution is therapy or medication. We don't always know that. The fact that today people turn to medication doesn't always mean that they have no choice. It could be the easy way out, so to speak. So I'm not a doctor. There's a diagnosis from a doctor that the Torah would say is a legitimate doctor, who diagnoses somebody with anything clinical, whether it's bipolar, depression, borderline, schizophrenia, post-traumatic, the syndrome, PTSD, etc. And they diagnose, and then they say, okay, this person needs some medication, some therapy. Obviously, the Torah tells us, Nitn Reshus l'Reifa l'Rapis. That's an area where a Reifa was given the power. But it is somewhat complicated, because it's one thing if a person has heart disease, God forbid, or cancer, or diabetes. It's another when it's in the mind or in the emotions, you can't always know whether that diagnosis is accurate. There are big critics of some of these diagnoses. Some saying all these diagnoses is a modern phenomenon. So, but being that we're not sure, we have to follow all the methods, including medical, therapeutic, psychological, and so on. But there's another thing that the Rebbe introduces, which in his letters, as well as based on Ayin beis, on the Tanya and the Ayin beis and other, the Zohar, etc., that if you show people how much potential they have and believe in their neshama and they believe in the positive, they're less likely to give in to these negative voices. That's a critical point. Imagine a tennis coach was hired to help the number one tennis player on earth to get out of a funk. He had an injury, or his opponent got into his head. And the coach became so compassionate and says, you know what? You're right. Let's just sit on the couch and let's cancel all your games. And I'm going to let's go back into your childhood and we'll find out who bullied you and who did what and who did when. And let's work it all out. It may take 10 years. It may take 5 years. Let's put you on some medication and let's get through it. Or the coach will say, hey, listen to me, my young man. You're number one in the game. You've had these doubts in the past. You need a kick in the pants. Get out there. And he pushes him to the limits to excel. You tell me, what do most tennis coaches do today? Now, if the person had a real injury or a tremendous mental breakdown, they need medical intervention, it's another story. But how do you know it's not just psychological? And if you pushed him, suddenly we become our own worst enemies. So there's a big discussion about how much of the depression is your own making. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying it could be something terrible happened to someone. The Holocaust. What if Viktor Frankl established a whole logotherapy? 2 people suffered equally. They lost entire families, and one person was able to rebuild his life, and the other person committed suicide or was so depressed they couldn't move. What was the difference? So he argues one of the differences because one had meaning in life, one had God, one had the idea of purpose. So that purpose was the additional so-called competitive edge that allowed that person not to suffer less, but not to succumb to the suffering. So when you deal with the mind and you deal with emotions, it's much more complicated than black and white. Does a person have control or not? The Rebbe's attitude, and that's how I would explain and defend it, was he knows that everyone has a chelik elikam mal mamish. You're a piece of God. God put you in this world. If he gave you another day, there's no way that he's giving you a day and not letting you accomplish what you need to accomplish. Are there exceptions? Yes. But if we start making the exception the rule, we'll destroy basically that confidence that every person needs. So the Rebbe would say, if it was really came to a point where all the doctors and everybody says, you're not capable, that's one thing. But why are we going to assume that? Because we could then end up writing off all the great things that people have done. We know people who've been deeply depressed and they've changed the world with that. They used it to motivate them. So it's a much more complicated discussion than just saying you are in control, not in control. The general attitude of Torah, Chassidus, and Kabbalah, the Zohar, the Tanya, is you have much more power than you think you have. Don't underestimate yourself. It's not about lacking compassion. The compassion is saying you have much more power. I gave you a neshama. Yes, I also gave you an animal soul. And the animal soul, one of its tactics, this is what he says in Tanya, and the Rebbe brings it. One of the tactics of the animal soul is not to sin. It makes you depressed. And when you're depressed, you will end up sinning because it creates a void, a vacuum. It creates low self-esteem. You're going to look for ways to relieve yourself. So it's one of the tactics of the Yetzer Hara, and the Rebbe is very adamant about that. And it's based on many of these sources that we're reading here and other sources, because it's also saying you have another side to you that is tremendously powerful and learn to access it. Don't just surrender to the animal soul and its methods of trying to get you down on yourself. Now, again, are there exceptions? Of course there are, but that needs to be established. Would you like to find out later in your life that you were given all the medication and you had gone to therapy and you found out, you know what, had I learned Chassidus a little earlier, I may have been able to achieve so many more things instead of just having self-pity and letting others pity me. You know, that's the last thing you want to find out. So I'm not going to in any way say, you know, I deal with people all day. People come to me about everything. There's always compassion. The question is, should the compassion lead you to push them, or should the compassion lead you to enable them? Meaning, give in to their what they feel is weak. Now, you could combine the two. Sometimes people have to go step by step. You don't tell a person to run a marathon of 22 miles overnight. You say, run 1 mile. Go step by step. Mitzvah gereres mitzvah. No one's saying do everything. You know, v'haftas Hashem elekecha b'chol levavcha, chol nafshecha, chol meidecha. And then you grow. And then one day, maybe you'll run the marathon for 22 miles. Obviously, it has to be paced and properly done with compassion. But the compassion has to include not just giving in to whatever someone's voices tell them. Sometimes you have to tell someone, my friend, you may not be able to hear this, but you have a lot more strength than you think you have. And we need to work on that. That's my take on the general subject.
Shkoyach, thank you. Especially the point about the letters from the Rebbe. That was a very powerful part of the argument.
Did I tell the story when we learned a few weeks ago? Did I tell the story of the Tzemach Tzedek's letter, where he writes about how he was sad when the Alter Rebbe was passing away?
I don't think so.
You did.
I don't remember.
I think you did.
Check out that letter as well. That letter is a very powerful letter. Where the Tzemach Tzedek was very sad, just briefly, he was very sad because he saw his grandfather, the Alter Rebbe, passing away. It was Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, Chav Dalet Tevis, and he davened Ma'ariv, and he was crying, he was atzvus. The Alter Rebbe called him over and said to him, I heard from my Rebbe that the face you show below is the face they show you from above. Basically, almost what it says here in Zohar. And the Tzemach Tzedek writes a whole letter about it. The Alter Rebbe essentially, and now there was good reason for him to be sad. His grandfather, Alter Rebbe, of all people, the Alter Rebbe was passing away. He passed away just after that. He made Havdalah, and then it was his Stalkus. Maybe the last thing he said. Now, what was the Alter Rebbe telling him exactly? That you shouldn't be sad that I'm passing away. He knew that he's going to sit Shiva, and the Shiva you cry. That's how it is. But the Alter Rebbe was trying to explain that even when you cry, and that's what the Alter Rebbe also talks about in Tanya, you cry because you're sad because you should be sad, not because you're demoralized and your soul has lost its connection to God. It means because at this time, the way human beings are created, we cry when we're sad. But don't let that define you, and don't let that be the force that's going to shape your life. So you'll sit the Shiva, you'll cry, and then you'll build, and you'll grow, and you'll learn whatever you learn from me. I want you to be able to do it in a way with simcha and smile, and God will smile. Remember, a smile is not forcing a smile when you're sad. It's an attitude. It's an attitude that God blessed me with life, and life is a blessing, not a curse. Another person just met me Shabbos, said to me, I will never have children. They're married. I don't want to bring children in this world, because he was hurt as a child. I said, but what you're doing is undermining your own potential. You can bring children in a beautiful world and give them a beautiful life. That's what we don't want happening. That people start surrendering to, look, the Meraglim. What was the great sin of the Meraglim? They came back with a bad report about Israel. Then weren't they sent to scout out Israel? They came back with a report. The problem was, no one asked you whether we could enter the promised land. You were asked how to enter. And they came and went across they crossed the line. The line was they said to Moshe, to God, we can't do it. That was never no one ever asked you whether you could do it. God said you can do it, and I'm giving you the power to do it. We asked you to figure out how to do it. That's a big difference.
Very powerful words, Rabbi. I think we need to excerpt this. I will excerpt Clean Letter and put it out there for people. It's very important.
By all means, as I said, I hope you understand. I'm not trying to be non-compassionate. I'm trying to explain what the kavanah here is in all these zohars and so on. It's not coming to bash us. It's not coming to say you're a terrible person. Why are you depressed? It's coming to say you're a great person. You have so much more going for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got a wonderful letter from the Rebbe once asking about this question specifically. And he said, an emissary, you were sent here as an emissary. You have a job to do. That is empowering. And an emissary always completes his mission. So I think the problem is that when you thinking about Gevurah, that the Gevurah is coming down, to punish you somehow, that it's making a bad situation worse. I think maybe that's what the way he was interpreting it, and that's not.
That's a good point. That's a good point too. Yeah.
I think that's it. Anyway, thank you.
There's no question. They always give the example. If you were Eliezer, you're going to appreciate this. Is Eliezer still there?
Yep, I'm listening.
Imagine that something, God forbid, happens, not to you or to anybody, and you happen to be a fundraiser, and that day you're going to meet a billionaire, and you want $1 million from him. I can assure you that if you're a professional, you're not going to let him see you depressed. You're going to put on a good face. Why? Because a smile brings a smile, and depression brings depression. My point is that it's exactly what Robin just said. The energy you exude, even if it's not always reflective of your immediate mood, is an energy that is going to be productive. Again, there's nothing wrong with crying. Atzvus and crying is not the same thing. If someone cries over a real tragedy or a loss, that's healthy. We know that. We're not talking about holding back sad feelings. We're talking about letting it demoralize you to the point that you feel you're worthless. You feel I can't do anything. I'm paralyzed. We all know depression is worse, is tremendous paralysis. It basically doesn't let you do anything. And I feel for anyone that's in that place. I'm not suggesting it's, even we say it's your free will. It's not like I think that somebody who's in that place says, oh, okay, let me press a button and suddenly I won't be depressed. I understand there are deep things going on, but we're talking about the overall picture of how to approach your life. Okay.
I also think that what you said is Dafka, this structure, this framework you tried to elaborate on, which is coming from the Zohar and the Ayin beis here, and of course, and then also from the other Maimon and Tanya, etc., that Dafka, in order to tackle the depression, it takes a certain mindset not to give into it. I think that's your point. It's like Dafka the Hefech, I am being compassionate by pushing you to understand that you have a say in this. You can't yield to it. And I think that is compassionate. So it's not callous. It's just a different way, perhaps a more, you could say carefully, a more constructive way of defeating depression. So I mean, that's, to me, the chiddush here is that you're not saying it, well,
Okay. That's well said.
You're saying this is the approach to help you beat it.
That's well said. Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
Nice, nice, Yitzhak. That was good.
Yeah.
That was good. Rabbi Jacob said, was that story about the Tzemach Tzedak's letter? Was that the one where they said moichin, not midos?
No. That's the Rebbe Rashab speaking to the Frierdiker Rebbe before his Histalkus. Yeah, that's Beis Nissen. His spouse. Yeah. Look, I honestly almost deal with this on a daily basis. I'm talking about personally, one-on-one. Compassion is always the driving force. Meaning, whatever you're going to say is always being, if it's coming from anger or judgment or condescension, forget about it. Then you don't belong in the business. Everything is driven by compassion, and love and care. You have to, what's hard to ascertain at times is how much to push somebody and how much to give them leeway, so to speak.
Exactly.
So obviously there are times you have to give leeway because that's where people are at. There are people who have been really hurt, and sometimes they have to get through the hurt before they can rebuild. It's very understandable. So I don't know if there's a formula, I would say black and white, this is the way it works. It's not that way at all. It's case by case. Some people, especially if you know them well, have more strengths and you need to really get them going. Some people don't have those strengths yet, and you need to teach them about the neshama. Like I know people have told me, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know about a soul. All I know is about misery in my life. I never heard about a soul. So obviously, even though they have a powerful soul, you have to now exercise it. So I will give a person like that exercise. Say every morning, Moda'ani, start getting to know your inner self. Start getting to know there's another part of you that's not miserable. So I'm just showing you the examples. Other people are there and do know better. And then you have to strengthen another way. And we all need each other. Robin said earlier, it's true. Sometimes when you're in a dark place, it's hard for you to free yourself from there yourself. You need another person. You need a mentor. But there are times where you see somebody who just won't listen. I think a while back, Yitzchak may have asked me this question, or somebody did. What happens if you're somebody they simply will not listen to anything but their own narrative? I have to deal with this all the time as well. And then, you know what? You have to make an assessment. Can you help them? You can't help them. I've told people, I don't know what more I can say to you. You're trapped in your narrative. You refuse to hear another one. I'm not judging you. I just don't know what to do at this point. It's like you're in the pit. I'm giving you my hand to pull you out. You don't want to take my hand. Now it's your right, but that's where you get, So then you say you plant as many seeds as you can, and you hope that something will sprout. Maybe not today, maybe in a year from now, maybe in a month, something will emerge. I just try to pour as much light and neshama and love and care as I can, and hopefully something will give, something will soften, something will open up. But there's literally, I mean, you could write a book with general principles, but it's really much case by case. That's how it is,
Yeah, you could write. Maybe you should write.
I think
a
a
whole
book would be
about
great
this.
because we have a plague in this country right now of.
Well, you bet it's a major plague.
Suicide. I mean, it's like a necessity. People don't even know.
My wife's an internist, and maybe half of her patients are on antidepressant or anti-anxiety meds, or both. And not because she gives them freely, easily, but because they hack her and they cry and they really are not doing well. And so she has a heart and compassion, and she gives them what they want, essentially, to at least sometimes to give them a boost. But obviously, it's not natural that half of a certain population group should be depressed or anxious or both. So it's an epidemic in our country, and I don't think those statistics are terribly off America. Although here in Silicon Valley, unfortunately, the wealth breeds depression and anxiety. But
I will tell you this. From a preemptive point of view, not just dealing with once a person's there. Preemptive from the youngest age. I take this cue straight from Torah Chassidus, the Rebbe. The more mission-centric a person's life is, that your neshama came down, as Robin, you said, the letter you got, the more you're on a mission, you're a soldier on the front lines, and you know it in your depths of your heart from the youngest age. That's the best, to me, the best immunity. The best defense is offense, because that drives you to do what you have to do and not allow yourself to get distracted. An astronaut going to space may get depressed, but he knows he's on a mission. He can't just suddenly press the brakes and say, hey, you know what? I need a month off right now because he's on a mission. And so I think that, again, I'm not talking about, God forbid, a real illness or injury or disease or something like that. We're talking about taking everything a level playing field. That, to me, is the biggest preemptive thing that any of us can do, whether we're adults or children.
Wow, that last line is a very unique way of dealing with it, that we're on a mission that from a very young age. I don't hear that, in people dealing with depression. 15% of the American population is taking antidepressants. That's
Look, let's be honest. Depression is coming a lot from leisure.
That's very beautiful.
A lot of empty time, a lot of leisure. You have nothing to do and nothing drives you. So what do you think is going to happen? At some point, your life becomes just like, there's a big vacuum. And then the only thing that works are different highs, quick highs. I mean, honestly, what would you think would happen to our population if there was no television, no media, no video games, no internet, none of that, no escapes, no sports? What do you think would happen with most people today? They'd go completely off their wall. The suicide rate would go through the roof.
It just happened with COVID. It just happened. People had nothing, no place to go.
But at least they had television, so they still went to this.
True. That's true. But they still didn't have their usual distractions, and it caused a lot of depression.
Yeah, because we live in a world with all our blessings. It's created a certain amount of apathy and I brought nothing to fight for. It's a big topic. So all I will say is the Zohar comes into context when you understand a mission-driven life. So mission-driven life, you're going to start showing, a soldier will start saying, I'm depressed today. Hey, I'm taking off.
Right. Very good, Rabbi.
No question about it. Being productive, and in particular helping others and helping make a better world. I mean, even the doctors will tell you that those are natural remedies for depression.
Right.
But Yitzhak, I like how you phrased it, that being Gavordik, so to speak, hey, you know what? Pull yourself up by the bootstraps, take it, is really an act of compassion. So there's to me, that was an important line, because I'm saying we need Rahmanis, but the Rahmanis, as Rabbi Jacob mentioned, is the Rahmanis is being expressed, true Rahmanis, through being more Gavordik with the person, with ourselves in that aspect. Thank you.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I can hear in Rabbi Jacobson's voice, and it's very heartening. It's very beautiful, Frank. I'll just say that the vigor, the strength with which because he's helping people like this all the time, every day. And even though you might say it's not tough talk, but it's forceful, but it's almost like, hold on, let me help you pull yourself out of this. But you got to follow the recipe. You got to try. And it sounds harsh, but it's really like the ambulance, the emergency technician rushing in and saying, "Come on, hold on, let's get out of here." But the person has to want to hold on, and hold on. They have to make an effort. They have to initiate the effort. So it's an interesting thing. Coming in with tough talk, you might say. Someone who's sad hearing this might say, "Wow, that's tough talk." But the reality is, he's saying, "I'm trying. I want to help you. Come on, let's go." So it's a very tricky thing. Like you said, it's a case by case thing. But I do think a whole book could be written about it. And I think Rabbi Jacobson, if you don't have already enough titles and topics for books, this
Rabbi
is about it, because applying Chassidus to the Indian of depression and anxiety. I mean, wow, that'd be a great chesed. I mean, I have to go back and look at your book on these topics, but something tells me since you wrote that book until now, you've given this even much greater thought and read through much more Chassidus and have a lot more to say about it than what you wrote in the book, as great as it is, you know?
I think so.
I'm sure. I mean, it was definitely more mature, but I go back to the book myself. The principles are there. There's a lot of ways to say it, more different sensitivities.
So
it was a great. So go ahead, Elliot.
I just wanted to ask a question.
Yeah.
We can't hear you, Eliezer. You're muted.
If I just wanted to ask, Jacob said, if with being a little blunt, but if he's had day-to-day experience for many years with this, more than almost anybody probably in Chabad as a mashpia and dealing with these Indian, how successful has that been, Rabbi Jacobson? How effective has that therapeutic
approach
been?
Now you're getting into sensitive areas. Okay. I'll be as direct as I can. I feel quite successful, actually. I'll tell you how, an interesting way. A lot of what I've learned, this may sound strange, but a lot of what I've learned from my one-on-one sessions and interactions inform my classes. Because I don't just give classes based, I learned an Ayin beis or something. So the classes I give, especially that Sunday night, my life, and these classes as well, are informed by those experiences. So I think my most powerful effect that I've had on people for success, if you want to call it success, was through the message or the approach that they learn from me. Because I hear the feedback is the methodologies that I've constantly been propagating based on the Chassidish approach to life challenges. Have affected many, many, many people. It's hard to measure because I've not done any studies and diagnostics, and I don't go and survey. But I've just from what I hear from people's feedback, and as far as individuals go, it's hard for me to say because I don't want to sound arrogant. I think that, again, I don't know percentages, but most people that come to me definitely go away better than before they came by me. Now, what does better mean? I've saved marriages, definitely help people get married and do things in a healthier way. But there've been quite a few that I cannot deny. I don't feel that I was able to directly help them, but I do believe that some things I said maybe planted seeds that one day will help them. So overall, I would say the answer is yes. It's a pretty big, I would consider it success. It's not 100%, but remember another thing. In my case, I'm not. I'm sorry, I just want to say, in my case, I'm not paid for or measured by my peers or medical professionals. For me, my biggest impact is teaching Chassidus properly that help people live healthier lives. So I think if you ask people who have heard of me or known me, would probably say that it has helped their lives overall. So it's different than, like, let's say, how many heart surgeries did I do that were successful and how many were failures? It's hard. I don't have those type of numbers.
And you don't always see the result. I mean, the fact that somebody's coming to you for help in itself is the soul saying, I want to get better,
Yes.
There's a problem here.
Yeah, I will tell you that sometimes helping people could be even in the form of allowing them to speak and giving them the license, the freedom to express their pain. Many people have told me this, that alone was healing for them. And that begins the process. But it's a bigger discussion. Yeah, it's a good discussion.
I was referring specifically, by the way, I know people come to you for shalom bayis, all these different inyanim. I was asking specifically about depression.
No, I know that you were, and I was referring to that. I wasn't just talking about shalom bayis. Remember, a lot of shalom bayis connected to depression too. Another point I would make is that I think it's important is, what was I going to say? For me, success really would be is how many people am I training that will be able to help others do the same. That to me would be something that would be a big break, because at the end of the day, it's about the next generation. It's not just what I do. It's getting other people inspired by the Hasidic psychological method that can help people. That would be that to me is very vital.
Well, it's working. Okay. You get students in this class. I'll speak for myself. I do carry it forward, and the broadcasts are out there, and God's willing, it should spread outward.
Amen.
Amen. Maybe your wife will ask you to come into the office and give a Hasidic therapy.
Well, I'm determined to write a book on Chassidus and apply, basically relating it to not sort of less observant Yidden and people generally. And a lot of my Chassidus I learned from Rabbi Jacobson, and I'm very determined to write a book. And he's gonna get a lot of credit. God's willing in the forward.
Okay.
So you're having a major impact, and I'm determined. Absolutely, everybody that knows me knows this is what. And your mission statement, but the mission class that you had, talk about having a mission, midlife miracle class, which helps you define your own mission statement and what are you all about? What are you supposed to be doing here? Who are you? What are you supposed to be doing? And that was very, very clarifying for me. That was a very helpful class. I encourage anybody who hasn't tried it. If you already have a strong sense of purpose and mission, good, a big event. But if you're not sure exactly what you want to do the next steps in life, it was wonderful, very wonderful, very just really helped clarify things for me. And if God's willing, I will. It's my intention to get this out there.
Yeah, Shakala.
Amen.
Okay, let's sign off. I have a few other things I must do. I see it's late already. Okay, so
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, so we move from okay. From Ayin beis point of view, we finished the paragraph on page 1434. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow. And and we also spoke quite a lot about atzvus and I guess mental health.
Important
And I hope
stuff.
everybody's more upbeat than they were before.
I
For
read
sure.
where somewhere that it said that the Hasidim of old, I think it was Rabbi Broin brought it, we used to say after Shavuos, Mazel Tov, when they greeted other Hasidim, Mazel Tov, that we received the Torah. So this is a upbeat way of
Very nice.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, so I'm going to stop I'm stopping the stream here 1 second. End of paragraph, page 14.